Republic of Ghana. Grant that he may perform his high duty as in thy sight. Give divine guidance to the President of the Republic, endow members of Parliament and ministers of state with discernment and vision, integrity and courage, that through the labors of government, this land and people may be well and truly served, and that good purposes for the common human life be realized in our midst. Amen. O God, grant us a vision of our country, fair as it might be, righteousness where none shall wrong his neighbor, a country of plenty where evil and poverty shall be done away with, a country of brotherhood where all success shall be founded on service and honor shall be given to the deserving, a country of peace where government shall rest on the will of the people and the love for the common good. Bless the efforts of those who struggle to make this vision a living reality, inspire and strengthen our people that they may give time, thought, and sacrifice to speed the day of the coming beauty of Ghana and Africa. Amen. Communication from the President. Mr. Speaker, absence from Ghana. In accordance with Article 59 of the Constitution, I write to inform you that I will be traveling outside the country on 12 November 2017 to Qatar at the Saudi Sheikh of the Royal Highness. I'm also invited to attend the Education Above All Foundation Third World Business Summit in Education. The summit is scheduled to take place on 16 November 2017, when I will deliver the keynote address. I will return. I will return to Ghana in the evening of 17 November 2017. During my absence, the Vice President, Dr. Mohammed Mawia, will act in accordance with the Constitution. Signed, His Excellency, the President.
Is this check this when you stop your check?
Yeah, they're your team.
Page 38. Page 39. Page 40. Honorable.
Right Honorable Speaker, my name is Edwin Ni Lante Vanderpool and not Lampte.
Thank you very much. To be effective. And finally, page 41. Honorable.
Right Honorable Speaker, if I can indulge you, page 21, item 47, I think line 3, the word there should be compensation, not compensate, so the table office can take note. Item 47.
Honorable members, the votes and proceedings of Tuesday, 14 November 2017, as corrected, is hereby admitted as true record of the proceedings. Honorable Majority Leader, any indication at this stage how we will proceed?
Speaker, item number 3 is on questions. But last Friday, an indication was given that the minister was going to be on time, for which reason it was decided that the question should not be fired. So the indication was given to the minister. And because of that, even though we had the answer, the minister has traveled. So we will take it in the subsequent days, to tomorrow or Friday, when she returns. The Speaker, in the circumstance, we'll come to item numbered 5. Item numbered 5. And then we follow after that with item number 6.
Honorable Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we note from what the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs and Leader of Government Business, the Majority Leader, have said that on a budget day, a minister responsible for aviation probably knows her allocation is not even in the House. But it would have been important that where she traveled to, and then you got it advertised. And Mr. Speaker, I want to raise a strong objection to where the Attorney General is seated. And I do so because we have drawn leadership attention. Mr. Speaker, the only minister recognized by the 1992 Constitution is the learned Attorney General. And we have often said, even in the past, Minister for Finance, the Attorney General must be given their due, not to hang around like she's hanging over there. She's not a hang around minister. No. Not to hang around. Mr. Speaker, it's such an important portfolio. I've got a vice president who has come to support his bosom friend. We can understand as a member, Mr. Speaker, but the Attorney General and the Minister for Finance, whatever it is, they must have dedicated seats. They must have dedicated seats in this House. Thank you. Speaker, the Attorney General is seated
in the inner perimeter of the chamber, which is reserved for non-strangers in the house. Where she is seated, she is a non-stranger. And she's comfortable. She has not complained to the minority leader. The Speaker, the minority leader should not behave as a sympathizer who would want to wait more than they've reached. The Attorney General is comfortable. The Speaker, as far as I'm concerned, this is a non-issue. We can go forward. Thank you very much.
The position of Attorney General is definitely mandatory, but the only determiner of order of precedence is His Excellency the President. At any given time, no such communication has been extended to Parliament, and we shall proceed on it as a non-honorable minority leader. And what is even also good to note that in the past, some question or the other was listed as a precautionary measure, like you have said, just in case the Minister for Finance does not come in time, so that we'll have something to do. I'm sure that will be a thing of the past. And the Honorable Minister for Finance has set a good example, making it unnecessary for us to set out any emergency measures. So we shall proceed accordingly and put our questions for tomorrow. And then we proceed to the item at the commencement of government business. Therefore, item 5, presentation of papers. Minister for Finance.
Annual report on the petroleum funds for the 2017 fiscal year.
The paper is presented and is referred to the Committee on Finance for consideration and report. Item 6, motion. Minister for Finance. The main business for the day. You, Honorable Minister, we proceed.
Live from Parliament House, where the Finance Minister, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, has just started the budget presentation for 2018. It's a packed house now. Both sides of lawmakers are here. The Vice President, Honorable His Excellency rather, Dr. Bawumia is seated, as well as most ministers of state here. We'll go straight away and take the presentation from the Finance Minister.
Constitution, permit me to present to this august House the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana for the 2018 financial year. Mr. Speaker, what I present to the House today are the highlights of the highlights of the budget statement and economic policy of government for the year 2018. I respectfully request the Hansard Department to capture the full document. I also do submit to this august House the 2017 annual report on the petroleum funds in accordance with Section 48 of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act 2011, Act 815, as amended. Mr. Speaker, this year has been a very busy one for all of us. This is the third budget we are presenting in the year. The first one was in March, the second, the media performance review and now we are presenting the 2018 budget. During this period, we have had the cooperation of this House in passing a number of bills in our determination to put the economy back on a sound footing. On behalf of the President, I wish to thank this august House for all their support. Mr. Speaker, in March, when I presented the Asempa budget, and Matthew 13, I indicated to this House our commitment to take deliberate strategic steps with the required discipline to fix the economy. Such was the crisis that we were expected to do little more than just borrow more to incur more debt, but not for the purpose of growing the economy, but rather for servicing a fast increase in debt. Thankfully, President Akufo-Addo came into office with a positive mindset and inspired all of us to see the invisible, feel the intangible, So President Akufo-Addo, with a positive mindset, inspired us all to see the invisible, to feel the intangible, and to achieve the impossible. I'm happy to note that we have turned the economy around. And our policies are yielding results, restoring hope and bringing relief to Ghanaians. Personally, it is heartwarming when a parent runs up to you. Thank you for putting money in my purse. Because she did not have to pay 2,000 cedis for her 2 daughters in Africa. Or when an excited teacher trainee shows you the text message notification of his allowance received. Yet these are just 2 examples, Mr. Speaker, of the promises some said were impossible to fulfill. Mr. Speaker, we resolve to be fiscally disciplined and respect the limits this august House set for us within appropriation. Again, I'm glad to report that we are well on course to end the year with a fiscal deficit of 6.3% from 9.4%. In fact, lower than the 6.5% contained in the budget in March. If I may add, Mr. Speaker, this is only the second time in a decade that a government has managed to stay within its budget deficit target. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been achieved by the government of President Nana Akufo-Addo, and we have achieved under 1 year what seemed impossible in 8 years. We have restored macro stability. We have renewed confidence in the economy. We have provided reliable electricity supply. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have indeed provided reliable electricity supply. And Mr. Speaker, our SHS students have literally forgotten how to spell Doomsaw, because Doomsaw is dead. We have returned to robust growth with a real GDP growth of 7.8% in the first half of 2017 against 2.7% in 2016. We have reduced inflation, and October inflation of 11.6% from 15.4% in December 2016. We have maintained stability of the cedi against the US dollar. We have brought down the policy rate to 21% from a peak of 26% in 2016. There is more, Mr. Speaker. We have normalized the domestic yield curve, issued the country's maiden 15-year bond in April 2017. We have improved external balances driven by higher export earnings and lower imports. We have improved gross international reserve to 7.2 billion, equivalent to 4.1 months of import cover. The highest, Mr. Speaker, international reserves in the country's history. We have improved primary balance to 0.3% surplus in September 2016 against a deficit of 1.6% in September 2016. We have received positive sovereign rating reviews from international rating agencies, Fitch, B stable, Standard & Poor, B minus positive. We have successfully completed the 4th IMF ECF program review, and we have achieved positive developments in the oil and gas sector, favorable IFLOS ruling, and Sankofa producing first oil 3 months ahead of schedule. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, our commitment is to solidify these gains for as long as we remain managers of the economy, and that may be a long time, to ensure irreversibility. We are implementing the following measures to tackle some of the long-term structural issues: capping of the statutory funds at 25% of government tax revenue. Thank you very much for your support. Operationalization of the Treasury single account to consolidate all government funds at the Bank of Ghana. Tightening of expenditure controls in GIFMIS to minimize inefficiencies and budget overruns. Strict enforcement of the PFM Act, as well as the Public Procurement Act, to ensure efficiency in public procurement, and adoption of the competitive tender process, which is eliminating wastage and giving Ghanaian taxpayers real value for their money. We have successfully refinanced the first tranche of the energy sector legacy debt through the issuance of the first ever energy bond by Esla PLC. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that this successfully raised 4.7 billion Ghana cedis, over $1 billion, and is now the highest ever energy bond in Africa. We have also introduced the cash waterfall mechanism to prevent new debt accumulating. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to report to this August House that after a few months of intense preparation, the Akufo-Addo government has rolled out the destiny-changing free senior high school policy across all public schools. To ensure equal opportunity for every Ghanaian child. Mr. Speaker, we have also rolled out the National Digital Property Addressing System to provide we have launched the National Identification Scheme, and we have indeed restored the teachers and nurses training. And we have indeed restored the teachers and nurses training allowances. Mr. Speaker, this year we have restored macroeconomic stability, which is protecting the value of money in the pockets of ordinary Ghanaians and giving businesses the predictability and space to plan and invest, thereby sowing the seeds for economic growth and job creation. The broad agenda for next year is to translate the stability achieved into shared growth with aggressive policies aimed at creating more opportunities for jobs. The President is determined to reverse the trend of the last few years where businesses operated merely and mainly to service loans, pay taxes, and electricity bills. In line with this, for 2018, we will continue to stabilize the economy, offer reliefs, including reducing electricity tariffs, to make the private sector truly competitive and create more employment. Our job creation agenda will be driven by investments in human capital, strategic infrastructure, agriculture and agribusiness, entrepreneurship, and innovation programs. Specifically, we will vigorously continue with and heavily invest in our key policy initiatives and flagship projects such as Planting for Food and Jobs, stimulus package for distressed industries, One District, One Factory, Stone Good Development Fund, National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, Free SHS, National Identification Scheme, and National School Feeding Program. Mr. Speaker, we have prioritized investments in these areas to ensure that we establish a fair and inclusive society which creates life-transforming, productive opportunities for every able-bodied Ghanaian. We are confident that these priorities will not only deliver jobs, but will improve the security and well-being of Ghanaians and communities across the country by A, increasing agricultural growth and development, providing decent work through skill and entrepreneurship development and industrialization, as well as increasing opportunities for all through the provision of quality education and health delivery. Mr. Speaker, our policy priorities for 2018 and beyond promise two vital ingredients for any serious progressive society: opportunity and prosperity. For us, the fight against poverty and unemployment is not optional. It is a national security issue. We intend to pursue this goal of building a society of equal opportunity responsibly by protecting our natural endowments and at the same time adding value to the exploitation of these rich resources under our custody. Given that our President has been honored to co-chair the UN Advocacy Group for the Global Sustainable Development Goals, Ghana is taking a leadership role with this budget in driving this sustainable transformational agenda for the Ghanaian people and also for Africa. Mr. Speaker, for a successful implementation of the SDGs, we need to involve all sectors of society. Let us move beyond this budget cycle and make the SDGs flow through the DNA of Ghanaians in our effort to meet the 2030 targets and the embedded Paris Agreement for climate action. Mr. Speaker, the theme for the 2018 budget is putting Ghana back to work. This theme reflects the tools provided in the 2018 budget to energize the entrepreneurial spirit within every Ghanaian. The job of the Akufo-Addo government is to assist our people with the tools and the environment to go out there to work and earn a decent living and improve their lives. We plan on providing opportunities for as many Ghanaians as possible to initiate projects on their own. Mr. Speaker, it is time for Ghanaians to arise and build. Nehemiah. It is time for all Ghanaians who put their shoulders to the wheel and to speak the same language. Then nothing, Mr. Speaker, will be impossible for us. We must come together in a new partnership of our faith-based institutions, civil society, businesses, and government to create a powerful locomotive for transformation so that our President's coordinated program of economic and social development policies will create, as the President states, an optimistic, self-confident, and prosperous nation through the creative exploitation of our human and natural resources, and operating within a democratic, open, and fair society in which mutual trusts and economic opportunities exist for all. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the budget should not simply be a statement to share the national cake between different groups, but it should capture how I believe the budget should not simply be a statement to divide the national cake between different groups, but it should capture how a nation comes together to meet the challenges of our times and our circumstances. We should understand our shared sociology and values in order to discover a modern view of our Ghanaian citizenship. Mr. Speaker, in August 1950, J.B. Dankwa said, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, he said, we had, it will be good to, we had neither excessive means to suffer waste, nor any time to wait. The call to relieve our country and people from a wretched existence is urgent, and our watchword in this urgency for an early answer. Mr. Speaker, we must, as a matter of urgency, create an enterprise culture so that we can transform our newfound stability into productive, industrialized, dynamic, open, and responsible market. A society that eschews poverty of aspirations and with deliberateness celebrates, prepares, and challenges the youth to discover and achieve their full potential. Mr. Speaker, this President seeks to do this in this budget. Mr. Speaker, our prudent management of the economy under the able leadership of our president is yielding positive results. Provisional data on the performance of the economy from January to September 2017 show that nearly all the macroeconomic indicators are on target. Please permit me to provide a summary of these performances. Mr. Speaker, we are returning to a robust growth after 2016 recorded the lowest growth performance in almost 2 decades. The real GDP growth for 2017 is provisionally estimated at 7.9%, of non-oil growth 4.8%. This compares extremely favorably with a real growth target of 6.3% and a 2016 outturn of 3.7%. At the sectorial level, the industry sector recovered from a negative growth of 0.5% and is expected to grow by 17.7% in 2017 due to increased production in upstream oil and gas. Growth in the agriculture subsector is expected to be broad-based despite the initial alarm associated with the army worm invasion. The services sector remains the dominant sector of an estimated share of 55.9%. Inflation. Mr. Speaker, inflation continued to decline in 2017, mainly on account of exchange rate stability, tight monetary policy, and fiscal consolidation. Inflation declined from 15.4% in December to 11.6% in October. Monetary aggregates. Mr. Speaker, broad money supply grew by 20% in September 2017 on account of growth in the net foreign assets at the Bank of Ghana. This compares with a growth of 22.3% in 2016. Total credit to the private sector and public institutions recorded a growth of 16.8% in September 2017, of which the private sector accounted for 87.9%. Interest rates. Mr. Speaker, interest rates in 2017 continued to decline in response to the gradual improvement in the macroeconomic fundamentals, easing inflation and exchange rate stability. The monetary policy rate was reduced in January 2017 to 21% in July 2017. Similarly, money market rates broadly declined. The average lending rates of banks, however, marginally responded to the downward revision in the BOJ's policy rates and eased to 28.9% in September 2017 from 31.7% in December 2016. Mr. Speaker, the cedi remained relatively stable against the major currencies on account of improved liquidity in the foreign exchange market. As of October 2017, the Ghana cedi accumulatively depreciated by around 4% against the US dollar. Mr. Speaker, the balance of payments recorded a surplus of $379.3 million for the first 3 quarters of 2017, compared with a deficit of $1.3 billion in 2016. This improvement was mainly driven by higher export earnings and private transfers. The gross international reserves as at end October 2017, as I mentioned, stood at $7.2 billion, equivalent to 4.1 months of import cover. This compares to $4.8 billion last year, of 2.5 months of import cover for the same period last year. Mr. Speaker, the thrust of fiscal policy for the 2017 budget was to restore confidence in the economy, ensure fiscal and debt sustainability, and promote overall macroeconomic stability through a number of bold initiatives. Preliminary data for September 2017 indicate that fiscal outturn was broadly in line with expectations despite revenue shortfalls. Total revenue and grants for the period fell short of target by 9.3% an actual of 28.4 billion against a target of 31.3 billion. While expenditures, including arrear clearance, was constrained by 8.1%, an actual of 37.7 billion against a target of 41 billion. This resulted, Mr. Speaker, in an overall fiscal deficit on cash basis of 4.6% of GDP against a target of 4.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, reasons behind the lower than anticipated revenue performance was mainly due to delays in implementation of tax compliance and administrative measures, as well as slow real GDP growth in the non-oil sectors of the economy, particularly the services sector. The real truth, order. The real truth, Mr. Speaker, is that as Ghanaians, we are impaling ourselves. We are not paying our taxes, and we are helping others to evade taxes. Mr. Speaker, despite the revenue shortfalls, it is encouraging to note that the outturn for the period represents an annual growth of 16.2% compared to 4.1% during the same period in 2016. Mr. Speaker, we manage expenditures were generally controlled to minimize overruns due to the strict usage of GIFMIS, as well as the implementation of quarterly cash allotments to MDAs. We are also seeing a new commitment in public procurements to protect the public purse. Mr. Speaker, the accumulation of expenditure arrears from the previous government remains one of the major challenges Mr. Speaker, one of the major challenges to meet the fiscal objectives of government and the successful implementation of the budget. Given the negative impact of the buildup of arrears in the economy, government committed to an arrears clearance program in line with the IMF arrangement of the government of Ghana. A total amount of 3.2 billion was programmed for clearance in 2017. Of this amount, 2.3 billion was cleared by the end of September 2017. Besides the program stock of arrears, government identified a buildup in outstanding payments and claims, which were subjected to audit. Of the total claims audited by the Auditor General of 10 billion, only 50%. Only 50% of the 10 billion were acknowledged. This, Mr. Speaker, was a level of naked abuse that the public purse was made to endure in recent years. Mr. Speaker, we have moved on. The validated claims will be cleared in due time in line with government's macroeconomic program for the medium term. Mr. Speaker, as at end September 2017, GMPC had lifted 6 parcels of crude oil on behalf of the state and transported a total of 20,545 scraps of gas to GNGC, Ghana Gas. Total crude oil lifted was 5.8 million barrels, 3.8 million barrels of Jubilee oil, and 2 million barrels of TEN oil, compared to 2.9 million barrels, all from Jubilee Field, for the same period last year. Receipts from crude oil liftings for the period up to September 2017 accrued from the 35th, lifted in December 2016, to the 38th Jubilee liftings, and first, also lifted in December 2016, to third 10 liftings, amounting to $339.3 million US. total petroleum receipts as of September 2017 was $362.6 million compared to the receipts of $172.9 million for the same period in 2016. Mr. Speaker, on the debt stock, I'd like to recall that one of the challenging economic situations that our government inherited was a ballooning debt stock which placed undue burden on the 2017 budget. Indeed, Ghana's debt to GDP ratio had increased from 32% in 2008 to 73% by the end of 2016. This situation resulted in an increasing interest burden, with interest payments alone consuming 45% of tax revenue and 6.8% of GDP. We'll get to that. Our government, through prudent management of the economy, reduction in the fiscal deficit, and a policy of debt reprofiling, has successfully reduced Ghana's debt burden. The debt to GDP ratio has declined from 73% at end December 2016 to 68.3%. That's at the end of September 2017. This is the first time, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time since 2006 that Ghana has witnessed a year-on-year reduction in the debt to GDP ratio. The interest burden of Ghana's debt has also been reduced. Interest payments have reduced from 45% of tax revenue to 43.8% in September 2017, with a 41.9% reduction at the end of 2017. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that the annual average rate of debt accumulation of 36% over the last 4 years has declined over the last 9 months from 36 average rate increase to 13.6%. This, Mr. Speaker, again, is the lowest annual public debt over the last decade. This is the lowest annual increase in the public debt over the last decade. Mr. Speaker, our prudent debt management has therefore improved the debt outlook and debt sustainability for Ghana. We will continue to keep the public debt in check and move purposefully away from the unbridled borrow and spend culture of the previous 8 years. Mr. Speaker,
Order.
Mr. Speaker, the 2018 to 2021 budget is informed by the President's coordinated program for economic and social development policies, which aims at creating a conducive environment for the private sector to thrive, propel growth, and create employment opportunities, especially for the youth. In this regard, government's policy objectives for the medium term will aim at stabilizing the economy and setting it on a path of sustained, diversified, and resilient growth. Optimizing the key sources of growth in the economy on a sustainable basis, enhancing a competitive and enabling business environment for private sector-led growth, formalizing the informal sector, building a strong and resilient economy able to withstand internal and external shocks, promoting agro-industrial enterprises as the basis for the One District, One Factory initiative, and creating entrepreneurial and employment opportunities, especially for the youth. Mr. Speaker, consistent with our medium-term development policy framework, we have set the following macroeconomic targets for the medium term, 2018 to 2021. Real GDP to grow at an average rate of 6.2% between 2018 and 2020. Inflation to stay within the target band of 8 plus or minus 2%. Overall fiscal deficit to remain within the fiscal rule of 3 to 5%. Primary balance expected to improve from a surplus of 0.2% of GDP and remain around 2% in the medium term, and gross international reserves to cover at least 4 months of imports. Mr. Speaker, based on our policy objective of ensuring macroeconomic stability and growing the economy for job creation whilst protecting social spending, the following macroeconomic targets are set for the 2018 fiscal year. Overall GDP growth rate of 6.8%, non-oil GDP growth rate of 5.4%, end period inflation rate of 8.9%, fiscal deficit of not 3.8%, fiscal deficit of 4.5%. Primary surplus of 1.6% of GDP, and gross foreign assets to cover at least 3.5 months of imports of goods and services. Fiscal sector 2018. Mr. Speaker, moving into 2018, our fiscal program is firmly anchored on the ongoing fiscal consolidation. Our prime focus is to ensure that the fiscal deficit, which remains our principal fiscal anchor, is programmed to decline to 4.5% of GDP from the projected 2017 end-year estimate of 6.3%. Over the medium term, the fiscal deficit is expected to stabilize around 3 to 5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, achieving this objective is not only critical but necessary if we are to maintain the healthy primary balance surplus required to eventually reduce the rate of debt accumulation. However, some critical issues must be addressed in the process. Domestically, we are faced with rising expenditures over the short to medium term as we invest more in programs that will stimulate economic growth and generate jobs. We will therefore need to boost domestic revenue through innovative channels that will not place undue burden on the entire populace. Mr. Speaker, we must make these decisions in good time to ensure that our future generation will be equipped with a priceless inheritance of a sustainable fiscal environment. For as the saying goes, let us build a roof before it rains. We are studying all the available feasible options carefully. In this vein, optimizing resource mobilization through improved tax compliance and efficient and effective revenue administration remains an important part of our fiscal strategy to boost domestic revenue mobilization for 2018 and the medium term. Consequently, in addition to empowering the Ghana Revenue Authority to bring to book tax evaders, we are equally investing in programs and infrastructure to widen the tax net. This will include the implementation and rollout of a national digital address system to help us track taxpayers, especially in the informal sector, an acceleration of the implementation of the National ID program, deployment of electronic point-of-sale devices to ensure that vendors are not under declaring VAT, and special audits, among others. At the same time, this budget also takes bold steps to start mobilizing revenue by making concrete changes in the tax policy framework, especially in tax exemptions. At the appropriate time, we'll return to this august House with our proposed legislative amendments to pave the way for the execution of our programs. Other tax measures being considered for the 2018 fiscal year include review of the suspense regimes, implementation of the excise tax stamp policy, extension of the requirement to produce tax clearance certificates for large private sector contracts, and improving property rate collection. Mr. Speaker, on the expenditure front, we have shown our commitment to eliminate expenditure overruns and will remain committed to continue with the design and implementation of the public financial management reforms with the aim of eliminating inefficient and ineffective allocation of resources. Mr. Speaker, currently, the wage bill poses the single major risk to our budget implementation. The entire human resource personnel management is within the public service will need to be revisited. We'll be considering our options carefully within the broader framework of the new public sector reform strategy. We'll have to streamline gift myths. We'll have to strengthen and enforce commitment controls. We'll need some payroll reforms. Mr. Speaker, these reforms will generate fiscal space to support priority spending programs, boost growth, improve the societal welfare of our citizenry, and guarantee the achievement of our goal of debt sustainability. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for 2017 fiscal year has been conservatively estimated at 51 billion based on our projection of the level of economic activity, government policy on taxation and donor grant disbursements. Mr. Speaker, total receipts from upstream petroleum activities amount to 3.2 billion Ghana cedis, estimated at 6.2% of total revenue and grants. This is about 1.3% of GDP and represents a per annum growth of 24.8% over the 2017 projected outturn. Domestic revenue is estimated at 50.5 billion, representing an annual growth of 26.9%. Mr. Speaker, non-tax revenue is estimated at 8 billion, equivalent to 3.3% of GDP. Of this amount, internally generated funds to be retained by IGF-generating institutions amount to 3.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, revenue inflows from the energy sector levies, specifically the Energy Debt Recovery Levy and the Price Stabilization Levy, is estimated at 2.1 billion. These inflows are reported for transparency purposes. They are not intended for budget utilization. Mr. Speaker, grants from development partners mainly in support of projects are estimated at 586.8 million, equivalent to 0.2% of GDP. We do not expect to receive any program grants. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that as a lower middle income country, these donor resources will seize of time, emphasizing the urgent need to boost domestic revenue mobilization. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure, including provision made for the clearance of arrears, is estimated at 62 billion, equivalent to 25.7% of GDP. The estimated expenditure for the year represents an annual growth of 14.5%. Mr. Speaker, compensation of employees, which continues to represent the single largest item of government expenditure, is estimated at 19.6 billion, 8.1% of GDP. Of this amount, 16.8 billion, Mr. Speaker, equivalent to 6.9% of GDP, has been provisioned for wages and salaries alone. Expenditure on goods and services is estimated at 3.5 billion, representing 1.5% of GDP. The annual growth of 66.9% reflects a full provision made to cater for the government's priority programs, including the flagship free SHS policy, which enters its second year of implementation in 2018. Mr. Speaker, the debt reprofiling exercise is having positive impact on interest payments Interest payments are estimated at $14.9 billion, 6.2% of GDP. Of this amount, domestic interest payment constitutes about 82%. As we consolidate our public finances, the annual growth of domestic interest payments is expected to decline considerably. Mr. Speaker, transfers to statutory funds, as well as all other earmarked funds, which are backed by the relevant laws, are estimated at 12.1 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the object of the statutory funds is to provide secure funding to implement critical programs and projects in the relevant sectors. Over the years, these sectors have been exerting a lot of pressure on the limited available resources despite allocations to the statutory funds. In consonance with the PFM Act 2016 Act 921 and Earmarked Funds Capping and Realignment Act, the earmarked funds will be realigned to national priorities. Mr. Speaker, allocations for development capital expenditure is $6.9 billion. Of this amount, domestically financed capital expenditure is estimated at $3.3 billion, or 1.4% of GDP. This represents an annual growth of about 219%. An amount of $3.6 billion has been budgeted from foreign finance capital expenditure, and this will be funded by a combination of donor project grants and project loans. Overall budget balance and financing for 2018. Mr. Speaker, based on the estimates for total revenue and grants and total expenditures, the 2018 budget will result in an overall budget deficit of 10.9 billion Ghana cedis, equivalent to 4.5% of GDP. The financing of the fiscal deficit will be from domestic and foreign sources. Net foreign financing will amount to about $3 billion, including a Eurobond of up to $1 billion, equivalent to 1.2% of GDP. Net domestic financing will constitute about 73% of total financing and includes financing from bank and non-bank sectors. Other domestic sources, such as divestiture proceeds and mineral royalty prepayments. The total NDF is estimated at $8 billion, or 3.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that in 2018, the primary balance, which is an indication of our fiscal effort, will be grown to a larger surplus of about 1.6% of GDP from projected 2017 outturn of 0.2%. This signifies our resolve to breaking the back of a growing public debt from previous years. Mr. Speaker, the projected benchmark crude oil price for 2018 is $57.4 per barrel, with a benchmark output of 53.25 million barrels. Similarly, the gas price for 2018 is projected at 3.94 per million scf, up from 2017 estimate of $3.03. This includes gas prices of Jubilee, 10, as well as Sankofa. The total petroleum revenue for 2018 is estimated at $669.4 million, with benchmark revenue projected at $335.86 million. Mr. Speaker, in line of Section 23(3) of the PRMA, we propose to this august House to cap the Ghana Stabilization Fund at $300 million. The reason for the capping is to use the excess amount over the cap to retire existing debt in line with the law. Mr. Speaker.
Order.
If you will permit me,
Order.
I will now present highlights of the performance for 2017 and outlook for 2018 for some of the parts of the economy. Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, our flagship Planting for Food and Jobs has been a tremendous success. The PFJ recruited 2160 university graduates and 1070 youths to register and provide extension services to farmers across the country. To date, 200 Mr. Speaker, our flagship Planting for Food and Jobs program has been a tremendous success. The PFJ recruited 2,160 university graduates and 1,070 youth to register and provide essential services to farmers across the country. To date, 201,000 farmers have been registered. In addition, 121,000 metric tons of subsidized fertilizer and 4,400 metric tons of subsidized seeds and cereal, legumes, and vegetables have been distributed to beneficiary farmers. The program also registers suppliers to distribute farm produce to public institutions across the school feeding program, the free senior high school program, prisons, defense and police, among others, to ensure availability of quality food in a timely manner in these institutions. The National Buffer Stock Company was revitalized to procure, store, and distribute the outputs from the Planting for Food and Jobs and other programs of the ministry. The company, in collaboration with the Agricultural Development Bank, registered 553 licensed buying companies. The invasion of the fall armyworm, Mr. Speaker, was managed through distribution of chemicals to farmers, recruitment of spraying guns, and monitoring and surveillance. This intervention recovered 123,000 hectares of farmlands out of 137,000 hectares affected. A strategic stock of insecticide and other logistics will be built to ensure ready availability of chemicals during outbreaks, as well as intensification of monitoring and surveillance. In 2018, to improve livelihood of livestock farmers in all 10 regions and increase meat production, 2,000 livestock farmers will be supported with 70,000 small ruminants. The ministry will also support 6 national livestock breeding stations to produce and distribute 200 cross-bred heifers, 1,700 improved pigs, and 100,000 cockerels. To promote agricultural mechanization, 220 tractors and accessories comprising 141 maize shellers and 77 multi-crop threshers were distributed to farmers and service providers. In 2018, the ministry will distribute 200 tractors and marching implements, 1,000 power tillers and walking tractors, 30 tractor-mounted reapers, 10 tractor-drawn rear blade, 10 tractor-mounted slasher, 60 boom and orchard sprayers, 4,000 motorized sprayers, 60 mechanical and pneumatic planters, 50 cereal harvesters, 200 multi-crop threshers, 400 irrigation kits, and 100 greenhouse technology for horticulture production. The ministry, in collaboration with Ghana Irrigation Development Authority, completed a rehabilitation of the Improvement Dam and continued works on Tammany Phase 1 headworks. Stakwe, Zapalsi, Konokli, Uasi, which are at various stages of completion. To facilitate the provision of community-owned and managed small-scale irrigation facilities, especially in northern Ghana, the ministry identified 192 small dams and dugouts in 64 districts for development under the One Village, One Dam initiative beginning in 2018. In addition, 30 pumping schemes and 100 boreholes will be developed and a feasibility study conducted for water transmission lines in northern Ghana. Mr. Speaker, the $1.8 billion syndicated loan used in purchasing 969,000 metric tons of cocoa for the 2016-2017 cocoa season has been repaid. For the 2017-18 season, an amount of $1.3 billion has been raised to purchase a projected crop of 850,000 tons. The average FOB price of cocoa in the past season witnessed a 30% decline from $2,950 to $2,080. This situation compelled other countries to reduce their producer prices of cocoa. Mr. Speaker, the Akufo-Addo government, however, maintained the producer price of cocoa at Ghana cedis 7,600 per ton to minimize the harsh effects this decline in international cocoa price could have on the earnings of hard-working cocoa farmers. This price reflects 88.6% of the net FOB price, a clear demonstration of this government's commitment to enhance the welfare of cocoa farmers. Government will initiate an inducement package to take care of bottlenecks in the customary land tenure system, while government remains committed to improving road infrastructure in cocoa growing areas. There's a value for money audit to ensure that taxpayers' monies are used judiciously and efficiently. Cocoa Board, Mr. Speaker, over the past 3 years, awarded road contracts to an incredible amount of 5.1 billion Ghana cedis. Against a budget of 1.6 billion, resulting in excess expenditure of over 3.5 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, as part of measures to promote industrialization and to shield us from falling cocoa prices, government modified incentives to increase processing of cocoa in Ghana through progressive discounts that incentivize tertiary processing. Thus, Mr. Speaker, raising value addition to cocoa and creating jobs. Mr. Speaker, our Cocoa Board is also in discussions with Cote d'Ivoire to begin to look at a program of managing our shared products and also looking at commodities exchange in our country.